All right, so we got the Galaxy S25 here versus the S22. Is this a good upgrade? Let's go ahead and find out here. Let's talk about all the pros of this upgrade. So let's actually start off with the trade-in price. Currently right now, you can trade in your Galaxy S22 for only $200, and that's to get the unlocked version. And I'm sure they have carrier deals and stuff like that. But that is currently what's going on right now. And yeah, you have some really nice color choices as well with the S25. You guys can see it's probably one of my favorite colors. Now, let's just go ahead and talk about the hardware difference. There is not a whole bunch different here. As you guys can see, the cutout is going, and then we also do have these very thick kind of camera rings on the S25 here. And also, if we come to the side here, and this is a question that I got, so yeah, the S25 is just a bit taller, but it's really not noticeable, guys. You guys won't really notice the size difference too much at all. They both have that matte finish. They're both IP68 dust and water resistant. And on these sides, the S25 is a lot flatter as opposed to the S22 here. It's not as flat. And yeah, I still think the overall feel of the S22, it feels a little bit more comfortable. The S25 does feel just a little bit kind of sharp because you have these flat edges, but it just comes down to your personal preference. But to me, it does feel like really squared off now. And yeah, so that is pretty much it for the hardware. Not really too much has changed. You do have Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the S25 versus the Gorilla Glass Plus on the S22, and that is the Victus Plus. But besides that, that's pretty much it. All right, so let's talk about the display difference here. So the displays are pretty similar, but there are some minor differences here. The S25 has a 6.2 inch display versus the S22 6.1 inch display. It's not really that big of a difference there. It's not really significant. You won't really notice it. And then we also now do have an LTPO display versus just the dynamic AMOLED display on the S22. So the LTPO display will help with battery life, which it definitely does on the S25. It's a big difference here, and we'll talk about that. But both displays are 1080p, both displays are 120 Hertz, and both displays are HDR10+. There is also a pretty nice difference here with the max brightness as well. On the S22, it's 1300 nits, and then on the S25, it's now 2600 nits, and it's very noticeable in direct sunlight. And they're both, 1080p displays with a 400 plus PPI. Now, you do have the Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the S25 versus the Gorilla Glass Victus Plus. And that is basically it here. The bezels really don't look all that different as well, and the colors don't really look all that different. But this is a pretty decent display upgrade. I would say the biggest thing here is actually really just the max brightness. But as far as the display quality, it's not really anything different. Like I said, the LTPO is going to help with the battery life, but that's pretty much it. The S22 still has a very nice looking display. A very good, respectable bezels on here. They look almost identical. Honestly, I can't tell the difference. And yeah, there's not like a huge difference. It's a slight, size increase. It's brighter, and it has the LTPO. That's pretty much it. So let's actually talk about the specs a little bit more. So the S25, it does have the new Snapdragon 8 Elite processor. We do have 128 gigs of internal storage and 12 gigs of RAM on the base model. The S22 does have the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. We have 128 gigs and 8 gigs of RAM on the base model. You can see the big difference here in the single core and multi-core scores. And then when we head over to 3D Mark here, you guys can see that difference in the 3D Mark test, 34.71 frames versus 14.5. Come down here, we can see we have 9 to 18, 16 to 48. So is the S22 like slow in like general performance? And the answer is no. It's still pretty fast phone. They feel almost the same when it comes to just general performance. But yes, there is a performance jump here when it comes to power users. The S22 is definitely one of those phones that can kind of get way warmer than I would like. But for the most part, like as you guys can see, your general performance, it's really not too much of a difference. It'll open up an app like a second or two quicker. But it's not like the S22 is like lagging all over the place. It's not like the animations are bad. It's still a pretty fast phone for the most part. It's not slow by any means. Now, like I said, power users, yes, this is a pretty good chip upgrade. You will notice the difference here when it comes to gaming performance. Let's go ahead and do PUBG. And like I said, the biggest thing here is that the S25 doesn't get like super hot like the S22 can. See which one gets in here to PUBG quicker. And I will like run it back and do like a full speed test for the phones that I didn't do for you guys that, you know, are curious about that. But as you guys can see, that was a pretty big gap in terms of getting into PUBG here. Alright, so for a game like PUBG here, it still runs really well on this 8 Gen 1. We still have 90 frames on here. It's pretty smooth for the most part here, so you really won't have, you know, too big of an issue. If you're more of a casual gamer, like I said, it can kind of get a little bit warm. But for me, I've actually never had an issue with like glitching and crashing and just slowing down and stuff like that on the S22, because if I'm playing a game, I'm usually in here for like maybe 1 or 2 matches, PUBG, Call of Duty, something like that. Like I'm not like a serious mobile gamer like that. But yeah, if you are on the S25, you get 120 frames, and overall that power, you will notice it in just, you know, like emulators. Maybe you're doing like some high-res video editing on your phone. The export times will be a lot better as well. It's just stuff like that, and it's not going to be as warm to the touch. And yeah, that's the thing that I noticed between these two phones. So yeah, power users, this is a pretty good upgrade. You'll notice a difference. Like I said, the frame rate is immediately noticeable. So yeah, so take that into consideration. If you're not a power user, this really does not matter, because it's not gonna matter, because you won't feel the difference in everyday performance. Now let's go ahead and talk about a few other things. You will get 7 years of majorOS updates on the S25, and then the S22, it will get the Android 15 update. We are awaiting that update, but it launched with Android 12, and it'll only get 4-year pledge. So, you know, just do take that into consideration. And yeah, as far as the, you know, OS now, once we get One UI 7, it'll look very similar, and you'll have a lot of the same stuff. And the Galaxy AI stuff is here on the S22. It doesn't have all of the Galaxy AI stuff, I believe. Some of the stuff is kind of like limited. But again, once the update comes, you'll have more stuff, like, you know, your essential stuff, the stuff that I use at least, because I really don't use the AI stuff. But the circle to search, like I like the you know, the Gemini stuff, like being baked into the button right here. But this is all stuff like, you know, it'll come. So I'm not really concerned with like the software part, because they're almost identical, and they'll be, you know, pretty much identical when the update does come. Let's check out these speakers at max volume. We'll start with the S22. Yeah, so the S25 speakers are definitely a little bit louder. The bass is a little bit louder for sure. Yeah, it makes the S22 sound actually kind of flat in comparison when it comes to that bass. So yeah, so I would say the speakers are a pretty decent upgrade. Everything else has not changed. The ultrasonic fingerprint scanner is really fast on both of these phones, so you don't have an issue with that. Have not had an issue. Very fast, so no issues there. All right, so let's talk about these cameras. A lot of people were surprised with the S25 versus the S23, and you know, the reason is because Samsung hasn't really touched these cameras too much. So both phones have a 15 megapixel camera, both phones have a 10 megapixel telephoto with 3x optical, and they both have a 12 megapixel ultra wide. They can both shoot an 8K24, but the S25 can shoot an 8K30. And then you also do have a 12 megapixel selfie on the S25 that can shoot in 4K 60, and then you have a 10 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 60. So check out these side-by-side stills and video. All right, so let's talk about the battery life here. So this is a big concern for a lot of people. People say the S22 battery life is not great, and I agree. It's really not all that great. The phone probably does like 4 hours of screen on time. It's just not that great. But the good news is this is a big battery upgrade here. So just because of the chip efficiency, this is a pretty nice upgrade. So you do have a bigger battery on the S25. It is a 4,000 milliamp hour battery versus the 3,700 milliamp hour battery. And then the charging has stayed the same. It's 25 watts and then 15-watt wireless, and then your reverse wireless charging is on here. Yes, the screen on time on the S25 is dramatically better. The standby time is better as well too. So the overall battery life experience is way better. So if you're thinking about upgrading, battery life is like your sole purpose. And I would say if you're like a power user, right, and battery life is also like a concern for you, the S25 is a really, really good phone because it's very powerful now. And then you also do have pretty good battery life. I have zero battery life issues. Screen on time has been excellent on this phone. So yeah, guys, battery life is excellent. So I would say, this is a pretty interesting upgrade because the biggest complaint I get with the S25, again, is the battery life and then it getting too hot. And the S25 fixes a lot of those things. But, is it worth, spending that money? You kind of have to decide that, for yourself. The cameras also, it comes down to that. What you thought about the image quality. Was it worth it to upgrade? And it really comes down to those. You do get 7 years of majorOS updates, so if you do upgrade, you get to keep your phone for a very long time. You don't have to worry about upgrading because of outdated software or whatever. So there are definitely some benefits to upgrading. But the S22, I would say if you don't have battery life issues and you're not a power user, you don't really need to upgrade here. The S22 is perfectly fine. So let me know what you guys think.